me. That's what I'm talking about.
Wait. Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
I'm in a unique position to address diversity in the workplace because I'm in the room. I'm not diverse. I'm part of the perceived power structure. And for so long as people like me don't participate in these diversity initiatives or don't at least articulate their importance and stand behind them, that's going to be a continuing amount of time that diversity really doesn't take hold until attrition wipes us old white guys out. And then maybe some change occurs, but I'd like to see it happen before I, go wherever old lawyers go.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Scott McLaughlin, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm good, Merle, and I'm really pleased to be here. I so happen to have a PhD in BS, so this should work out well.
This is going to be awesome. And so for those of you who don't know Scott, just want to give you a little bit of his background. Scott attended Nebraska for college initially to play football. I mentioned that to my husband, who's a huge sports fan. And he was like, oh man, he must have been really good if he went to Nebraska. But it looks like you only went to Nebraska for a couple of years before you transferred to Rice, which I find interesting because that's where all the really, really smart people go in Texas to go to college. And then you went to LSU for law school. And Scott is currently a partner at Eversheds law firm. And you specialize in labor and employment. It looks like you're a traditional lawyer for the most part, which is interesting because I do a lot of searches for traditional lawyers, and they're very hard to find these days.
If you mean traditional labor, yes, I do some of that.
Traditional labor. Yeah.
Yeah, my practice is the typical employment lawyer in the U.S. practice, a litigation-based practice, and any dispute between an employer and employee is pretty much where you'll find me.
Okay, so you're not specializing in union work.
It is among my specialties. I'm specializing in labor and employment in general, and we do a fair amount of traditional labor work within that umbrella.
Okay, all right. So thanks for straightening that out. I wanted to talk to you. The elephant in the room for me and you is an article that you wrote almost exactly a year ago and it was published on LinkedIn. It was June 13th, 2020. It was after the murder of George Floyd. And you wrote a very provocative letter, basically entitled "How White Privilege Helped Me Succeed in Big Law." And that's what I want to ultimately get to. I don't want to start with it, but I wanted to lead with it because I think that kind of informs. There's a lot to unpack there,
Yeah.
But I want to start with the idea that you went to, or let's put it. Tell me your story. Tell me where you grew up, how you grew up, and what led you to law school.
Well, I'm old, so that's a long story, but I'll make it short. I grew up in Houston. And as you've noted, I went to Nebraska on a football scholarship, and then I transferred back home and completed my athletic and academic careers at Rice. Then I was a football coach in college for about 6 years. And after doing that, I did that long enough to understand that was no way to spend my adult life. And so I went to law school because I was looking for something to do where I felt like my own merit or lack of merit would govern my success or failure, and there wouldn't be a lot of politics or anything like that that would get in the way. And my best friend at the time from high school told me that I was born a lawyer and I
Uh-huh.
needed to go to law school, which I didn't know about myself, but turns out he was right. So
Okay.
that's the summary of how I ended up at law school. And I began my law career at what was then known as Fulbright and Jaworski in Houston,
Mhm.
and is now Norton Rose Fulbright. And I've practiced basically in the Houston market for about 27 years now.
Okay. And in one of the things that I found interesting was that you said that you were able to get into that first law firm because your uncle knew somebody.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was in the top 10% of my class at LSU, so I did
That helps.
on my own. I had the ability to get clerkships at good law firms and that kind of thing. But there's
Hmm.
no question that my uncle was had actually been a client for a man named Robert Bambase, who was at the time the head of the labor and employment section at Fulbright in Houston. And so I applied for a clerkship and I got one with Fulbright. I got one with a couple other, big firms in Houston. But I think things just fell together for me because I was already interested in labor employment. Mr. Bambase took a liking to me and basically told me if I could walk and chew gum, I had a decent chance of getting hired. And I could walk and chew gum. But all this kind of relates to the right white privilege story. I was a college athlete, former coach. Uncle knew a guy. Guy took a liking to me. So I think the skids were greased pretty easily for me, and all I had to do was not screw up, basically.
Right. And so the article starts with the murder of George Floyd seems to have finally awakened some of white America to the idea of white privilege. And I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. But I'm wondering a year later, do you think that that's still true?
Uh, Maybe
Are
not
they
so
still
much. I mean,
woke?
no, I don't know that we ever got woke, honestly. I think there was, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and these are issues I follow pretty closely just because I've always been interested in race relations. And I mean, I'll digress for a moment, but one of my earliest memories as a child was of my mother looking out a window and crying. And I asked her why. And it was because Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And
Mm,
so, she was always very heavily focused on this stuff, racial inequality, these issues. And I use the word stuff a lot, but I don't mean to make it sound non important. So, anyhow, um, I felt like at the time after Floyd's murder, maybe there was more outrage than I had seen from white America and all Trayvon Martin. The list
mhm,
goes on, right? In the
right.
previous episodes like this. But I don't know. I mean, it's too easy to be white in America, and I think that we, as white people, too easily lose our empathy, and so maybe I was overly optimistic in that statement.
I do agree with you. Um, and I really appreciate that at least you recognize, that it's easier to be white than it is to be black.
Way
I mean,
easier.
yeah, I mean that I think there are people who are willing to argue about that.
I know.
And that and that hurts,
But of course, those would be white people, right?
exactly.
And the thing that's always frustrated me about us white people is I was at a dinner, a happy hour. This is, I don't know, 9 months ago, 10 months ago. And there's a table full of white people, of course, and they're just talking about, how black people should respond to this or to that, or how they should feel about this or that. And I was just stunned that here we are, a bunch of white people sitting around, privileged white people, by the way, sitting around talking about how black people ought to feel. And yet none of us were black, obviously. And there was no black person at the table to speak up for how black people ought to feel. So to me, that's just sort of, and part of that's my demographic where I live, I think,
Mhm.
but there's an awful lot of insensitivity still going around in this area.
So did you speak up?
Well, yeah, I said something along the lines of why would a bunch of white people sitting here uh, having the conversation we're having think we know how black people feel or should feel? We haven't walked in their shoes at all. And of course, I got the usual, hostile stares.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately. But good for you. Thank you for having really the courage to do that, to speak up. I mean, again, back to this letter. I mean, the courage. You talk about having courage in this thing. What kind of pushback did you get? Pushback? Did you get anger? Did you get hate mail?
You know,
What
I,
happened?
to my surprise, I didn't receive any negative feedback, at least
Wow.
not that I can remember. There was, I suppose, silence in
Mm,
quarters where I thought there might be some affirmation, but
mhm.
I can't really be critical of that. I didn't get negative feedback. I didn't draw any criticism. Didn't I don't as near as I can tell, I didn't piss off any clients. And it's always that's the main thing you got to think about when you do something like this is this going to affect my business? Because you
Right.
hate to be selfish and self-centered. At the same time, I'm a lawyer. I represent clients. I need to take care that whatever stances I may take on an issue aren't somehow oppositional to a client's interest. I couldn't figure out how this could be, at least not openly, right? But then there are
Right.
many white men situated like I am who I don't think would or who I don't think appreciated what I had to say about being, a boomer generation white guy with all the privileges.
Well, I think that it just hits so close to home, right? I mean, people either look at it like you do and they become awakened, or they take it personally, right? It's
Right.
like you weren't calling anybody a racist, but there are
No.
plenty of people who could have gone there and said, "Well, you're saying that I'm a racist by
Right.
by saying this." And those are two very different things.
Very different. And what I touched on a little bit, if I recall the article, I was trying to find a copy and I couldn't. But anyhow,
We can send
what
it to you.
yeah, what I recall a little bit was touching on this notion of unconscious bias, which has become sort of a popular phrase. And there's a part of me that says I just don't see how bias is ever really unconscious. But there's a part of me also that understands that's different from overt racism. And the problem you run into, and you've seen it in the law business for our whole careers, is that you know um, whatever powerful white male partners at law firms have traditionally really liked working with white male associates, or
Mhm.
in a worse sort of way, attractive white female associates, right? I mean, and it's just people unfortunately like to be around people who they think are like them. That's what turns into unconscious bias. I'm not here to say if there's a more nefarious tone to that or not. I think it varies. I think sometimes there is. I think sometimes maybe it's just being insensitive. But the result's always the same, and that is that the minority lawyers get isolated. They don't have the mentors that white lawyers have had, and
Mhm.
they are looking for work when similarly situated white lawyers have more than they can handle.
Exactly. And then, I mean, and the work is really important when you're talking about moving up in a firm, potentially making partner, all the things, that you have to, the boxes that have to be checked in order for you to be considered for partner or to even keep your job, right?
That
You have,
the work is your lifeblood, and
right.
in a big law firm, in a mid-sized law firm, if it's a billable hour law firm, if you're as a young associate, if you're not getting the hours, the quality cases, the hours you can bill, then you're headed out the door eventually. Your career is going to stall. And so when again, traditionally white male partners with the work, they tend to have the power, and they tend to distribute the work to whomever they want without thinking about, am I equitably distributing the work? Am I giving everybody a fair shot here? And then what happens, of course, is what we've seen at law firms. You get the attrition from female lawyers, from minority lawyers, and it's just a result of how the work's distributed.
And what's ironic is when that happens, when that attrition happens, a lot of the times those lawyers go in house and they become your client, right?
Oh yeah, it's a beautiful justice in a way. I mean, and I've seen we've all heard these stories, right? The lawyer who didn't make it because she didn't get the hours, gets a decent job in house, elevates, and even when she first gets the decent job, all of a sudden those lawyers who weren't giving her any work or the time of day are calling her, wanting to buy her lunch and wanting to be friends now. It's like that. Was the war song? Let's be friends or whatnot.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does all this, the way you think about this stuff, how does this inform your practice? Because you are an employment lawyer. I know that you are, you're a management side lawyer, right? So
Right.
you're defending against discrimination cases and sexual harassment cases and all that. I mean, how does that inform what you do and make you a better labor and employment lawyer?
Well, there's several sort of layers to that. I mean, one of them is as a labor employment lawyer, even at the beginning of my career, it was easy to understand why diversity is important and why diversity is more than just, you know, trying to, I guess, manipulate a scenario so that people are elevated or not elevated. We were a better group of lawyers if we were diverse and if we allowed people's backgrounds to sort of inform how they practice law, how they appear, et cetera. On the defense side of these cases, I always believed that, I'm in the room where maybe these lessons can be learned by management and upper management. How do we not find ourselves in this situation again?
Hmm.
And whether the case was, or air quotes, a real discrimination case or one that wasn't. In other words, I've had cases where, you know what, I thought, gosh, I think they did it. I mean, I think that
Right,
this employee got fired because he's black. You know, I've had
right,
cases where I thought, no, he was a poor performer, but he's bringing the claim because he can, et cetera.
right.
Age cases, whatever. So, but I always believed that being in the room with management gave us management side employment lawyers an opportunity to educate and to show here's how this went bad. Here's why you have exposure. And you don't even have to, you certainly don't have to and shouldn't talk down to your client and tell your client, well, I think your manager here's a racist. Because these things speak for themselves. And if white people are getting a certain type of performance review that's robust and meaningful, and the black employee isn't, there's a problem, right? Or
Right.
if white people are getting a pass for committing so called infractions that cause the black employee to get fired, again, the thing speaks for itself. Now, I said there were two parts of this. The related part of this is, I think, as a boomer generation white guy, and this is part of what compelled me to write the article. I'm in a unique position to address diversity in the
Mhm.
workplace because I'm in the room. I'm not
Mhm.
diverse. I'm part of the perceived power structure. And for so long as people like me don't participate in these diversity initiatives or don't at least articulate their importance and stand behind them, that's going to be a continuing amount of time that diversity really doesn't take hold until attrition wipes us old white guys out. And then maybe some change occurs, but I'd like to see it happen before I, go wherever old lawyers go.
Go take that dirt nap, as my
Yeah,
friend
right.
Hazel
The
likes to
dirt
say.
nap. Right, right.
So one of the things you mentioned in the article was that you had, at least at that time, never been on a diversity committee at any of your firms or anything like that, and you're actually going to seek to participate. Did that happen?
I did seek to participate. I'm not on a diversity committee, but I don't take any umbrage at that. I think there's some perception maybe that I'm more effective doing what I'm doing,
Hmm.
and I am tied in. So
Okay.
whether I'm on a committee or not, I'm tied in. And part of that's because one of my longtime partners and colleagues, Marlene Williams, also in Houston at Eversheds, is on the diversity committee, and also our Houston office managing partner. She's a black woman. We've worked together almost 20 years now. And so I'm kind of in the loop, whether
Okay.
I'm at the table or not, so to speak.
And so, are you participating in the interviewing process? Are you kind of, helping to sell the firm to diverse lawyers?
When I have the opportunity, and Marlene will bring me in, when she can or when there's a reason. But generally speaking, I'm in the background, I would say. And truthfully, I would like to be more in the foreground for the reasons we just talked about. And I'd like to be working on these initiatives more openly, I think. But, I'm happy to sort of do what Marlene tells me to do until that happens.
Well, we'll tag Marlene on this
Oh, she's all good.
podcast.
Marlene's all
Okay.
good. She's of the same mind as me. But you should. That
Okay.
would be fun.
I
It's
think we
what's been
should tag
interesting
her.
for.
We should say Marlene got a shout out.
Yeah, yeah. It's been interesting. That's another thing that's really enhanced my career. Is I think we've probably worked together for 20 years. She started working for me at a law firm, many law firms ago. I forget when, maybe 2001 or two, maybe later. I don't remember. But anyhow, um, our ability to work together has been great. And we've been able to use our own diverse backgrounds. I mean, I'm diverse, even though I'm not, right? I mean, I come from a unique perspective and a
Hmm.
unique background. I
Absolutely.
just happen to not be racially diverse. Um, and so we're able to use those elements of our background and our own skills to kind of, in our cases, figure out which one of us should handle what, who should take which deposition, who should handle which case. And we
Mhm.
openly make decisions based on, again, our own diversity about how we're going to staff a matter, how we're going to strategically handle a matter. And we're able to do that because we trust each other. And, we're both working sort of in the same vein, trying to get something done. And that's how it ought to be. But you just don't
And
see
that
that
shows
much
you
of that today.
the beauty of differences, right? Different experiences, different perspectives coming at something from I mean, your lived experience informs how you see an issue, right? How you develop a potential solution has a lot to do with what your lived experience is.
Without any question. And when you have a close friend, as a white, again, boomer generation white man, with one of my very closest friends being a black female, um, us being able to talk about, say, George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, all of those things, because we talk about that stuff a lot, has been very good for me. And hearing her talk about the fear she has when her children are out driving and
Hmm.
may get pulled over by a cop, it kind of it woke me to the idea of, I'll never have that concern. My
Right.
my my white boys getting pulled over by a cop, I'm not worried about them getting shot somehow through that experience. But her and her husband had been pulled over and treated badly in various parts of Texas, and had to, those concerns were palpable for them.
Right.
So, understanding that is just, I just thought it was useful. It was a real awakening.
Right. So this podcast is called BS, and which is stands for Beyond Stereotypes, and I just want to, I mean, what stereotype? I mean, I would think that having been a football player, you would have endured certain stereotypes. I went to USC undergrad. I
Yeah,
was there with, the big guys, Ronnie Lott, Marcus Allen, all those people, and I know how, people look at football players, especially,
yeah.
and so, let's talk about you had, even though you're a white boomer dude, I'm sure you had stereotypes that you had to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, listen. I can't feel good about saying I had to overcome anything, and I can't feel good about it sounding anything like, what my black friends go through. Okay, so I just have to put those caveats out there, because I came again. If you're a white male and you played college football, got a shot at, I had a pro tryout, you coached some college football. Look, you're coming in on top, basically,
Hmm.
particularly back in 1994, right?
Hmm.
You're walking in rarefied air. Now, what that did was it pissed off, frankly, some of the female lawyers, in particular. And I can remember, being at a lunch and some old partner guy was asking me to talk about football, which I don't want to talk about either because it's dumb. And one of the female lawyers who I reported to at the time, she was 3 or 4 years ahead of me. I saw her elbow the female lawyer sitting next to her, and they both kind of rolled their eyes like, here we go again, and I just thought, man, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that y'all have to listen to this. I'm embarrassed I got to talk about it, and I get it. But I do unquestionably, particularly as a younger lawyer, got viewed as a little bit of a jock, and
Hmm.
maybe not as smart as the other people. And frankly, I didn't think I was as smart as them either. I ran around Fulbright Jaworski wondering when they were going to kick me out. Um, Surely I got here by mistake, right?
I really appreciate what you're saying about the fact that you uh, would never compare your situation and your lived experience to your Black friends. I mean, that is rare. I mean, a lot of experience, especially with um, uh, lawyers, is that they tend to think that they know everything, right? And even if they don't know something, they pretend that they know, and I call it mansplain
Right, right.
stuff. I mean, my favorite thing is to be in a meeting and say something, and articulate it perfectly, and nobody says a word, and then a man is at the meeting and he says the exact same thing that I just said,
Yeah,
and everybody's like, "Yeah, that's a great idea."
right.
I'm that person who then says, "Yeah, I just said that. It is a great idea."
As you should be.
Um,
Yes.
right, but I mean, have you experienced that, and do you ever speak up on behalf of your female or diverse colleague?
Always. And first off, within my own group, when one of, somebody who works with me or for me has the great idea that we share with a client who says great idea, I always make sure they know it wasn't my idea. Because
Okay.
that's just piracy, right? I mean, some smart person working for me came up with this great strategy, and I'm going to act like it's mine. And yet, I've been the smart person who came up with the great strategy, and some partner ran off with it as though it was his and never got the credit for it. But so I've seen that from both sides. I just think it's horrible not to elevate our colleagues when they do great things.
Right. Just from talking to you, I mean, obviously the article speaks for itself, and having, looking at you during this podcast has been awesome. And you are authentic. I mean, you are your authentic self. And this is one of the things that I try to preach basically on this podcast, is that you can be a successful lawyer, you can be at a big firm, you can yeah, and you might say, you get to do it because you're, a white boomer or whatever, but irrespective of that, there are plenty of white boomers who are afraid to be, or straight white male lawyers who are afraid to be themselves, in this profession. you know is that just something that you've always done, or have you done it more of it as you've matured? What would you say about being your authentic self?
Oh, I don't think I know any better. uh, I don't think I can help it. I mean, I can remember, again, second year at a place like Fulbright, and I described one scenario in that article, but I can remember clashing with, the power partners and all of that, just because I don't know what it is. I have a recalcitrant soul, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're my brother. I think you're my brother from another mother, man.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And speaking of mothers, you mentioned that your mom was always, uh, in line with civil rights and all that. And you were in Houston. I mean, how did that happen?
It's an interesting question. My mom grew up dirt poor in rural Ohio, during the Depression. And graduated, I don't know, high school class was 7 people, I think. And then,
Wow.
went to college, did well in college, had a career, did great in her career. She's just always been focused on those issues, or I guess some people would say liberal. I mean, I hate to, it's not like anti-racism is the sole province of liberals, right? There are plenty of
Right.
conservatives who are racist, so I want to be careful how I say that. But she's always been at the forefront of that. She worked for Child Protective Services in Houston for a long time, saw a lot of stuff, and that's just where her heart has always been. And so it was a great influence on me.
Wow. So nothing like your mama, right?
Right.
So, and I don't know if I told you, but I'm from Oklahoma. So I'm just what am I? Just we were just above you guys.
Well, when
Uh,
that story when she was looking out the window crying, we were in Miami, Oklahoma
uh-huh.
at that time. So
So I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Ah,
and my father was from Tulsa, and so a lot of the people have and had you heard of the Tulsa
I was
bombings and stuff before?
I was just going to bring up the Tulsa really massacre, is how I understand it,
Right,
in 1920-ish. And
right,
it's interesting, you know, that recently got a lot of prominent play in the HBO series, The Watchmen, if I recall correctly. But you
right.
know what? I was shocked. Some years ago, I first learned about it, and I was mortified, that, especially as somebody who kind of likes history and all that, that I'd knowing about it. And it's to this day, I'm thinking, how is that not taught in school, for example? I mean, or maybe it is now, but I don't think it is. And it just gives you, there's a lot going on right now. There's a book out, I'm really going to digress, called Forget the Alamo. And I haven't read it yet. My mom was telling me about it, but it sort of unwinds the mythology of the Alamo and looks at
Uh-huh.
the people, really who the people were who were involved and all of that. And it just feels like in this country, we have glossed over our history for all of our history, and now, maybe now some of these things are come to light. But I also think there are a lot of deniers. There are a lot of people who don't believe the Tulsa massacre happened, or just don't care and don't consider it an important part of our history. So it feels to me like we just get further and further apart on some of these things.
Well, and speaking of our history and what's going on now is, this idea, and I'm not particular, I don't quite know exactly what critical race history
Critical race
or
theory.
critical race theory is.
Yeah.
But this idea that people are so adamant that they don't want something like that taught makes me believe it probably should be taught. Not to mention the fact that Kim Crenshaw was one of my law school
Right.
professors. I mean, I was in law school, but I think that's a good example of what you just described.
Well, and you know, my mom, believe it or not, brought up critical race theory. She was at my house 2 or 3 weeks ago with me and my fiance, and she brought up critical race theory, and I was like, "What's that?" And she tried to explain it. So then, of course, I Googled it, started reading about it, and I still can't figure out what it is for sure. Um, and I
Right.
think that's part of the problem. I mean, how do you teach something that no one really understands what it is? There needs to be, I don't know. I think the idea is probably a great one, but there needs to be some parameters. And then again, and Merle, you know, I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't find these race issues that we're discussing particularly complicated. And by that, I
Right.
mean, I think this is just behavioral. And I think people who have the power, have the ability, again, in our context, to distribute work and advance careers, simply need to stop not thinking and start thinking, am I distributing the work fairly? Do we have associates who don't have enough work? And if we do, how come they're all female, for example, or how come they're all female or black? And why are all the white associates, you know, billing 2,100 hours a year, and our non-white associates or non-male associates are around 1,800? I mean, you ask yourselves these questions, and then you just fix it. That's all you do. You fix it. And my frustration in the article and now is we still don't fix it.
Right. Well, and I agree with that. I think that, personally, I believe that it comes down to two things. I think it comes down to power, which you mentioned, um, and it comes down to fear, and more distinctly, it comes down to the fear of losing power.
Yeah,
Um,
right,
and and that's a you know that's a human thing, right? It's like the difference is that people, I hate the term people of color, and I have no idea what the hell a biop is, but
me neither.
I think that black people in particular have had no power. And so in as and that goes for other people of different races. And so the divide, happens among race. I mean, when you have the power over people to have them work for nothing, right?
Right.
I don't talk about slaves. People weren't slaves, they were enslaved,
Yeah,
right?
right,
And so, that is something that, is like, it's in my DNA.
right.
And I know nothing about it, but I know that I'm affected by it.
Sure.
And that is a lack of a historical and systemic lack of power that, like you said, people have to be willing to let go of. And I don't know, until, like you said, a bunch of people take a bunch of dirt naps, I don't know how
Yeah.
that's gonna happen.
It seems that way to me too, and that's what's frustrating because just as an example, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, there are people, white people, who think that even though basically all black people in this country got here by well, not quite that way, but black people came to America as slaves, not as pilgrims, right? I mean,
Right,
they didn't land in a ship on the side of on a beach and found a colony. They were captured, brought here against their will, families destroyed, broken up. They were owned. So for hundreds of years, right? And then of course the Civil War happens, and then of course they're still not free, really, right? And you
right,
go all the way through the 50s, 60s before you see real meaningful change start to occur in the 1950s and 60s, and still in the 80s and 90s, I wouldn't say it has taken hold. And then even now, look at the issues we're still discussing. So for white people to just say, well, look, I mean, that was, 400 years ago or whatever, slavery. So they need to get over it. They're on equal footing now. I mean, white people say that. I hear it all the time. And I think it's one of the most ignorant things I've ever heard, or at least non empathetic things I've ever heard, because
right,
you erase
right,
400 years of history, basically, and act like we all got a fair start from the same starting line. And that clearly historically didn't happen. So if we can't learn to
right.
empathize as white people, you're right. We just got to take dirt naps and get out of the way.
Right. So Scott, I mean, this has been amazing, and I told you this in writing. I am your new best
Well, I
friend,
appreciate
whether
that,
you
Merle.
want
Same.
whether you want it or not. Um, what are we gonna do about this? What can we as individuals, what can we do? What can we do?
I think, and I talk with Marlene about this a lot, and I just think again, I mean, people in my position, I need to look, and I've sort of haven't done as good a job of this as I should have, particularly on the heels of the article. But I need to look for places where I get to talk about it and share what I feel about it. And I also need to look for opportunities, which I do in my workplace, to again elevate my diverse colleagues, get myself out of the way, help advance their careers, and truly treat all this like a team. And I think in my team we do, but I just don't know how to spread the love, I guess. I mean, it's
Right.
interesting, but I think you're right. I think it's people want to hold on to power. People fear change inherently, and it's attrition that's going to win this battle eventually. It's just a shame not to be doing it now. But I think we talk about it every chance we get, like we're doing today.
Right. Well, you know what? Thank you so much, Scott. This has been illuminating. It's been fascinating. I have just so enjoyed getting to know more about you and your willingness and your courage to have this conversation. And because it's going to be heard by a lot of people. And maybe you'll get, I'm sure you got some invitations to talk at some stuff. Hopefully you'll get some more because we need to hear your voice. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thanks to you for being here to BS with me today. And thanks to everyone for listening until the next episode. Remember that everybody is different and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.